Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best mode for all 60 brawlers in the game and also the best map to push them on. So before we jump into this banger of a video, make sure you're using the correct code. That'd be greatly appreciated. And without further ado, let's hop right into it. Okay, so as always, starting off with the Trophy Road Brawler, starting off with Shelly. So Shelly's game mode, by far the best one, is going to be Brawl. So she's pretty bad across every single game mode right now. And Brawl, because of all the grassy maps, she's pretty strong there, especially on maps like Center Stage and Sneaky Fields. So next up, we have Anita. So just like Shelly, her best game mode is going to be Brawl. She can be decent on Heist, but competitively speaking, her best win rates are on Brawl. So it's mainly on the grassy maps again, like Sneaky Fields and Center Stage. Okay, next up we have Carvin. So Colt right now is really bad in the meta, and competitively speaking, he's only really viable in Heist. There's a couple of maps he really thrives on though, and that is Safe Zone and Bridge Too Far, because it's really easy to hit your shots, and a lot of times you can just focus on the safe. So next up we have Ball. So the general rule of thumb is to play tanks on Heist, and Ball, by far the best game mode for him is Heist, and also maps like Pit Stop and Hot Potato, where there's a lot of walls where you can almost always get pressure because there's just so many walls to hide behind. So next up we have Jessie. So Jessie really struggles in this meta, but it's pretty easy to get a lot of value with Jessie in Hot Zone because a lot of brawlers clump up, and her turret can get so much value on so many maps. The best map for her by far is going to be Parallel Plays. Her turret is just so hard to get out of the walls on that map. Okay, so next up we have Brock. So the best game mode for Brock right now is Knockout, specifically out in the open. He's like the golden pick there. Can also be pretty decent in Heist, but Knockout mainly you see him a lot because it can be used a lot with other snipers, breaking up the map pretty easily. So the best game mode for Dynamite is by far going to be Heist. Normally it would be Siege, but of course that's been taken out quite a long time ago, but he's pretty good in Heist just because there's normally a few squishy brawlers which you can focus on, and also a lot of times you can just ignore the brawlers and just go for safe damage. So next up we have Bo. So Bo is pretty good in every single game mode you can get away with going Bo, but the best competitive game mode for him is by far Knockout. So when you're seeing him especially used in really passive knockout maps like Gold Armor Gooch, you can get so much value out of his gadget, and that's why it's his best mode. So next up we have Tick. So I would say Tick is equally as strong in Bounty and Knockout. Both of them are his best modes, and if you're looking for a map in particular dry season, it's going to be a really good defensive map. You just got to be careful with Tick because you just get countered a little bit by those really aggressive brawlers, but overall I'd say that this is his best map. So next up we have 8-Bit. So his best game modes are going to be Gem Grab and Heist. Really hard to split which one is his best. He can be really strong on Safe Zone and Hard Rock Mine, and he can deal a lot of damage to high safe, and also just a decent gem carrier because he can be pretty good against aggro. So next up we have M. So she's pretty strong on Brawl, but competitively speaking, her best game mode is going to be Heist, specifically maps like Pit Stop and Hot Potato. You can get so much value out of her on defense, but also just taking that defense to attack. She can deal so much damage to the high safe, especially when she's got that damage gear active. Okay, and lastly for the Trophy Road Brawlers we have Stu. So the best game mode for Stu right now is definitely Hot Zone, mainly because of his Speed Zone turret. You can get so much value out of it on so many Hot Zone maps, and it allows for you and your teammates just to get into that zone a little bit easier and dodge those shots, specifically on maps like Open Zone where that turret can just stay alive for literally the entire game. Okay, so next up we have El Primo. So El Primo really struggles in this meta, only really good against his fellow tanks, and you'll find a lot of tanks in Brawl, specifically on those bushy maps. So again, maps like Sneaky Fields is probably where you're going to get away with playing Primo the most. So next up we have Barley. So Barley really isn't strong in many places right now within the meta. He's only really good in Heist and specific maps with a lot of walls like Super Beach, Deep Diner outside of Heist, and then Heist maps like Hot Potato and Pit Stop you're going to see a lot of Barley on. Okay, so now we're going to be taking a look at the best brawler in the game. His best game mode is pretty much every single one, but if you'd have to pinpoint one, select one, it would have to be Hot Zone, because before he was meta it was still pretty decent when it came down to Hot Zone, specifically on maps like Dueling Beetles, because his whole attack can literally go through the whole entire zone. So the enemy is going to be charging your super a lot basically, and it's pretty hard to push into a screeching solo poco, specifically on Hot Zone. So next up for Rosa, the best game mode for her right now has to be Gem Grab, mainly because of her bush gadget, allowing her just to be a little bit annoying, and also on maps like Gem Fort for example, you can connect the bushes into the mid and just make it really hard for the enemies to really do anything because of that speed gear with Rosa. So next up we have Rico. So Rico is a brawler which actually specializes in multiple maps across a lot of different game modes, like like Hard Rock Mine in Gem Grab, like Pit Stop in Heist, but I thought that Knockout probably be his best game mode because of how strong he is on maps like Golden Gulch, where normally he's picked towards the beginning of a draft. But as I said, Rico is pretty flexible with multiple maps in multiple modes. Okay, so next up we have Edgar Event. So Daryl is an absolute beast in the Heist meta right now. He's pretty much usable in every single map, maybe except for Bridge Too Far, but still can get away with going Daryl because it just deals so much damage on the safe. You get your super so easily in this meta, and you're always going to get value out of him in pretty much every single Heist map. But if you have to pinpoint a best map for him, it'd have to probably be Hot Potato. Okay, so next up we have the best map and game mode for Penny. So Penny is a brawler which is incredibly versatile, pretty much good in every single game mode and map. So of course it's not really like a definitive best map, but I would say that she's pretty strong on Deep Diner because of her super. It's so easy to put it behind cover, and it's really easy for her just to dominate in the middle in Deep Diner. Okay, so next up we have Carvin. So again, another really versatile brawler. You can get away with playing him on multiple modes, but I'd say that Brawl is the best game mode for him, mainly because of how aggressive you can be with your gadget and super. There's so many favorable matchups, and the best map for him is probably going to be Sunny Soccer, just because of the wall peeking capabilities. So next up we have Jackie Event. So Jackie has received a little bit of a buff. It's made her a little bit more viable, but her best game mode has always been Brawl, just because there's multiple maps in the Brawl meta where you can get behind those walls. It's really hard for enemies to pinch you out, specifically maps like Super Beach. Okay, so next up we have the brand new brawler Gus. It's pretty hard to tell definitively what his best game mode is, but I'd say right now Gem Grab is probably your best bet at pushing Gus, just because he's a really strong support brawler. He hasn't really got the most DPS, so of course you want to be back in cover as a gem carrier and giving your super to the lanes as much as possible. Okay, so next up we have Piper. So Piper has somewhat not been the go-to pick in the meta right now, but you can always rely on her on certain game modes, specifically in Knockout and Bounties. So you can pretty much play her pretty much everywhere in Bounty. Just obviously got to be careful of the aggressive brawlers, but Shooting Star is definitely the best map for her. She's like the golden pick there. Okay, so next up we have Pam. So Pam in the meta is pretty flexible brawler and really strong against those aggressive brawlers. The best map for her though, and the best game mode, is definitely Hot Zone Ring of Fire. It's just really good because you can put that Pam turret behind a wall, and every now and then you can just go back to it and passively heal. So Hot Zone is more of the best mode for her as well because of her attack mechanic, being able just to shoot throughout the zone really easily and just land a lot of shots. Okay, so next up, the best game mode for Frank is definitely going to be Brawl on ladder. Frank definitely is a good Brawl brawler because of his super. Has a really high impact. I can open so many of the key walls, and a lot of times actually guarantee you a goal. So the best map for me has to be Super Beach, because a lot of times you'll actually pick Frank as the counter pick to those tanky brawlers like Ash, for example, and he can definitely have a very high impact with his super on that map. Next up we have BB. So the best game mode by far for BB is going to be Heist, mainly because of the interactions with her super. You can get so much damage onto the Heist safe if you actually angle it right, and also as well it just benefits tanks a lot better. There's a couple of maps as well you can really abuse the bubble mechanic on, maps like Pit Stop, for example, and Tornado Ring. Those are going to be her best map. Next up we have one of the best brawlers in the current meta right now. It is Bees. B is pretty much good everywhere right now. Just her overall mechanics makes it pretty easy to counter so many different brawlers, but the best game mode by far in my opinion has to be Brawl. She's such a dominant pick on Brawl. A lot of maps in the mid like Super Beach, Pin a Hole Punt, she can absolutely dominate on 1v3, and specifically when it goes to overtime as well, a B can absolutely pop off. Next up we have Nanny. So Nanny has been struggling in the meta for a little while, but there's always a couple of game modes which she'll always thrive on. One of them being Bounty, mainly because of her super, and specifically on Shooting Star she's always been the golden pick there. She can also do pretty well on Heist as well, but as I said, the only real key map for her in competitive is Shooting Star. Next up we have Edgar Event. So Edgar hasn't really got a game mode or a map which he really thrives on. Maybe Split in Hot Zone can be pretty okay for him, but overall I said Brawl was the best game mode for him, because normally the worst of brawlers you can get away with playing them on Brawl because it's really versatile, especially on the grassy maps like Center Stage and Sneaky Fields. Next up is Griff, and Griff is an absolute monster in this meta, mainly because of his ability to break open the walls and just his passive healing. But right now I'd say that Brawl is probably the better game mode for him, just because of the synergy he has with a lot of these other mid brawlers, and there's certain maps in the game where you only need to actually destroy a couple of bits of walls and you'll actually benefit so greatly from. Those maps are going to be like Beach Ball, for example, Super Beach as well, a couple just to throw around there. But yeah, Griff is really strong in Brawl. Next up we have Grom. So Grom's best game mode has to be in Knockout for me, specifically towards the end of Power League draft, and just overall in ladder is pretty strong on Knockout. It can also be played on Bounty as well. The best map for him, I would say Riverside is really strong, but also Bell's Rock is pretty OP just because of how easy it is to hit his shots on those maps. Next up, we have Bonnie. So Bonnie's one of the best brawlers in the meta right now, pretty much good in every single game mode, but there's a couple in particular which I think Bonnie gets a lot more value out of. So Bounty is a big example of Bonnie's best game mode, just because towards the end stages, like the last 15 seconds, her super is so strong. It can guarantee you multiple kills, and that's why I think Bounty is her best game mode. Also Hot Zone as well, because it's very spawn trappy Hot Zone, so her super allows you to get back into the fight. A couple of maps that I can think of which she really does thrive on, like Layer Cake for example, where her super is just so strong. Next up we have Mortise. So Mortise is a pretty weak brawler within this meta right now. It doesn't really thrive on many maps or game modes, unless of course the enemy team literally has 3 brawlers that are really weak, like snipers, which is very rare in the draft format. But for me, whenever I'm playing ladder, I think his best game mode has to be gem grab. It's a lot easier to find brawlers that aren't going to counter him. There's just like so many Gales and Anitas, etc. that just counter him too hard on Brawl. So gem grab's probably going to be your best bet to push him on, and Deep Diner for example, that's probably going to be the better map. Okay, so next up we have Tarvin. Tara has always been somewhat usable in gem grab and Brawl, but normally there's always a better pick than her. But in terms of her best game mode, I think Gem Grab is probably just her better game mode, specifically Gem Fort. That is literally like her golden map. She's always been so strong on the map. Okay, so next up we have Gina. So Gina is a pretty solid pick in near enough every single game mode except for Heist, because it doesn't really get countered by too many brawlers. But I think the best game mode for him has to be Knockout. The main reason being is because his pull holds so much more weight in this game mode than any other game mode, and just as well, there isn't really a lot of brawlers that can counter his pull in Knockout, so he's pretty strong on this one. So the best map for him has to be out in the open, just because he easily scouts the grass on that map. Okay, so next up we have Max. And so I think Max is pretty strong in every single game mode because of her super and just the ability to synergize with everyone. But I think her best game mode has to be Brawl, just because it allows you just to be a lot more aggressive, and there's a lot more maps that favor her on this game mode. Also, Backyard Brawl is probably her best map, just because it can be a lot more passive with that star power building up your super, and her super holds a lot more weight in that map in particular than any other game mode or map. Okay, so next up we have Mr. P. So Mr. P is pretty bad in this meta. He's decent in Bounty as well, but I'd say the best game mode for him is probably Gem Grab, just because he can afford to be pretty passive on a lot of different maps on Gem Grab. And Mr. P, as I said, not really the best. Maybe his best map is Deeper Diner, just because there could be opportunities to get some bounce shots around those walls. Next up we have Sprout then. So Sprout, just like Tick and Grom, his best game modes are easily going to be Bounty and Knockout. Sprout is a little bit better than the other throwers in other game modes because he can counter brawlers like Piper, for example, Byron, pretty easily and have a good time, specifically in draft as well as a last pick. He can be pretty strong. But anyways, in Bounty, Dry Season probably going to be his best map, but Knockout, there's a lot of different maps that he can be strong on. Okay, so next up we have Byron then. So Byron used to be a brawler which was usable literally everywhere, but right now there's just way better alternatives. It's pretty hard to really pinpoint his best mode, but for me his best map has to be Shooting Star, because he can actually counter some other longer range brawlers because he has a faster projectile speed. So I would say that Bounty is probably his best game mode. Next up we have Squeak then. So Squeak's best game mode is easily Hot Zone. His gadget is so toxic on this game mode because of course you got to push in and try and collect that middle zone, specifically on maps like Dueling Beetles. Time and time again I'll say like this is literally the most broken mode for him because of his gadget. So yeah, easily Hot Zone. So next up we have Spike then. So Spike is that kind of mid brawler within the meta. He's just decent across every mode except for Knockout and Heist, but I'd say his best game mode in competitive is Brawl. You actually see quite a bit of a higher pick rate within this game mode. In particular, Beach Ball, for example, is a map that he can really thrive on. Next up, we have Crow. So Crow is a brawler which I thought would have really dropped off in the meta with his slow, but still in the gem grab meta, he's super strong, specifically on maps like Double Swoosh. It's just so easy to scout on those maps, and then the slow as well. You just have to pinch a lot quicker to get that value with Crow. Okay, so next up we have Leon then. So Leon, I would say his best game mode is Bounty, just because he does counter the meta a little bit in Bounty. You know, there's more sniper brawlers in Bounty, so you can definitely have a good time. Normally in other game modes can get countered a little bit by the vision gears, so I would say that Bounty Hideout in particular is probably his better map. Okay, so next up we have Sandy. So Sandy used to be like a top 10 brawler within the meta. You could play Sandy pretty much everywhere, but right now only really sees Sandy being good on maybe like Canal Grande, but also in Brawl overall. Again, maps with a lot of bushes, Sandy can play pretty well in because his super can scout the grass a lot, and also Peach shot around the wall, so like Super Peach is a good example where Sandy can still be somewhat usable on. So next up we have Amber then. So Amber is incredibly underrated within this meta. Any passive map, you're going to get a lot of value out of her super. So I think Hot Zone is probably the best game mode for her, just because her super can be thrown over zone or thrown over choke points, and it's going to be pretty hard for the enemy team to deal against it. And also Open Zone is probably the best map for her, just because of her super and the ability to go in the grass. It just really helps out. Okay, and finally for the legendaries, we have Meg. So Meg's best game mode by far is Hot Zone. She really struggles on all the other game modes just because of how easy it is to take her down, but Hot Zone she'll always get a lot of value just because it's so much easier to get her super, and I would say either Open Zone or Ring of Fire are her best maps. So now moving on to the chromatic brawlers, starting off with Gale. So his best game mode in my opinion has to be Brawl. His super holds so much value, specifically when you're trying to score goals. I think the best map by far is Center Stage. His whole shot scouts the entire grass, making it so easy to push up. Next up we have Ruff. So Ruff's best game mode for me has to be Brawl as well, just because of his super. So there's a couple of maps in the game where his super is just so critical, just like Griff, to open up a lot of walls and make it so easy to counter the enemy team. So these are going to be maps like Super Beach and Beach Ball, where literally a couple of supers will break open the entire mid. Okay, so next up we have Surge. So his best game mode right now I'd say is Brawl. Used to be really strong in Hot Zone, but since his TP gadget got removed, can struggle a little bit there. But as I was saying, Brawl is going to be his best game mode, but his best map is actually on Heist. I think Hot Potato is his best map. He actually is picked a lot as a first pick on this map in draft. Okay, so next up we have Colette. So her best game mode by far, shock, is going to be Heist. So Heist is by far her best game mode. Going to be able to get so much percentage off of a high safe with her super every single time. Her best map is going to be Kaboom Canyon. Next up we have Lose. So easily his best game mode is going to be Hot Zone. Should need really no explanation because his super will cover the whole zone. And yeah, that's the only game mode really that he thrives on. Next up we have Belle. So Belle is a pretty decent brawler within this meta, counters a lot of the top brawlers, but for me the best game mode for her has to be Knockout, specifically on her map Belle's Rock, where it's pretty easy to get those shots and cause a lot of pressure with the bouncing. Okay, so next up we have Buzz. So his best game mode right now might be a little bit surprised to you guys, but I think it's Heist, because mainly in competitive he's seen on Heist, specifically Safe Zone, where a couple of his supers can literally catapult him from one save to another, and it's just pretty easy to get your super on this game mode. So as I said, Safe Zone is going to be the best map. Okay, so next up we have Ash. So Ash has always been such a dangerous pick when it comes down to Brawl, specifically towards the end of the Power League draft system, but overall the really grassy maps are really going to favor him. So maps like Sneaky Field, Super Beach are going to be his best bet of getting wins. Next up we have Lola. So her best game mode by far right now is going to be Heist, mainly because the amount of damage output she can get onto the safe, in particular Bridge Too Far. It's going to be so hard to beat her in a 1v1 because of that ego. Next up we have Fangs. So Fangs' best game mode is going to be a Knockout, because his super can easily get multiple kills and at least one kill because of how hard it is to defend against him in this kind of setting. Without supers, you know, Fang can really pop off against those type of brawlers. Also the best map for him is going to be maps like Riverside, also Belle's Rock as well. Okay, so next up we have Eve. So her best game mode and map in my opinion is going to be Riverside on Knockout. Basically any map with a lot of water in the middle, she's going to be somewhat decent on, you know, like Canal Grande for example, but overall she's not really best on any mode. Okay, so next up we have Janet. So Janet is a brawler which you guys probably know already. Is OP literally everywhere. Every single map, Janet is literally one of the best first picks. If I was to pick one map in particular, I'd pick Minecart Madness, just because the ability to fly over the minecart can be really good in getting pressure. Okay, next up we have Otis. So Otis is a brawler which is slowly going up in the meta now since his buff. I'm actually seeing a lot more use rate in Brawl in particular because of how toxic his super can be, and in particular maps like Center Stage, because you can actually get a lot of value out of the vision gear with Otis. Okay, and lastly we have Sam. So Sam is pretty OP everywhere right now, but in particular in Brawl, because that's where tanks are going to be really strong on. But that's in particular where there's a lot of fast play, a lot of maps with a lot of walls and a lot of grass where he can just absolutely abuse his star power on. So literally any map with grass like Sneaker Fields is going to be Sam's playground. Alright guys, it's going to be it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know what you think of all the different brawlers I did, the best mode and map, whether you disagree or agree on any of them. But yeah, that's going to be it for today's video guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.